Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to those attending and also to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Environment, Housing and Regeneration Select Committee, and my name is Councillor Wayne Bridges and I'm Chairman of this meeting. The key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within its remit and hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of the business to be considered today is shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and also accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. For those present in the room and intending to speak, please know that you will be filmed and any statements that you make will be recorded and made public. And for those attending in the public gallery this evening, you will not be on camera. A reminder to councillors, officers and those speaking today that you should turn your microphone button on when speaking. This will ensure that you can be heard in the room and by those watching online. Some quick housekeeping rules before I go on to the main agenda. We're not expecting a fire alarm this evening. However, if it does sound, please follow the officers to fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting point, which is the Civic Centre forecourt. Mobile devices to be placed on silent or switched off. And if we have residents this evening, you are welcome to give feedback about the meeting, and the feedback forms are available at the end of the room or also underneath the broadcast online. With that said, move on to apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, apologies from receiving Councillor Kaufman, with Councillor Ahmed Walana present as a substitute.
Thank you very much, and a warm welcome to Councillor Ahmed Walana, who's substituting this evening. Declaration of any interesting matters coming before this meeting. Are there any? Thank you very much. I can confirm that all business this evening will be discussed in Part 1. There are no Part 2 items this evening, which brings us on to Item 4 to agree the minutes of the previous meeting, pages 1 to 4. Can we agree on this correct? Thank you very much. That now brings us on to Item 5, which is the redevelopment of high streets following the COVID-19 pandemic. Good evening to our officers here this evening who will be giving their presentations, and we'll start with Helena. Whenever you're ready, please give your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm here along with my colleagues Stephanie Waterford and Nigel Cram as we co-wrote the report giving information from our respective service areas. The start of the report from page 7 was the Town Centre Improvements Team activity, which I'll just highlight some of the important points from the report. The key focus for our activity was the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government funding, which in total was a £545,710 grant awarded. This was awarded nationally, so each local authority was given a set amount. It wasn't the kind of grant that we had to apply for. And that was for 3 main activities to encourage the safe return back to our town centres and high streets. The activities that couldn't be supported was it had to be additional, so it had to be over and above the general support that was being provided by the council. The funding had to be for temporary changes, so it couldn't be used for any permanent physical changes or permanent street furniture or any of those kind of adaptations, and we weren't able to provide direct financial support to businesses. Part of that would be, my colleague will talk about the grants that businesses could actually access as well. So our main activity started from May 2021 when we went out to tender for 3 areas of support, which was for the welcome back themed branding, which had to be in accordance with the guidance, and there was very strict regulations about use of European logos, as that was the original source of the funding, so we had to be mindful of that as well. There was part of the tender was for temporary street furniture and the hire of things such as planters and hand sanitisers to be used within the town centres, and then the area was of specialist retail town centre expertise. So that was organising in total 21 events across 15 town centres, as well as online and in-person training, which small independent businesses could access as well. On page 8 we give a summary of how that total grant was allocated within each of those areas, and we also outline in terms of the events on page 9 the dates and the kind of themes of the events that were held from October 2021 until March this year. There's just one event, the Hayes Canal Festival, which was originally going to be taking place in September, which was postponed by the Canal and River Trust, but we have arranged that the funding can be continued beyond the scope of the grant to make sure that that event is supported as well. And then we also outline some of the training which businesses were invited to join as well, which is a lot about their online presence and an introduction in terms of digital marketing and how they can improve residents' access to what they know about the businesses through online marketing as well. On page 10, we highlight in terms of the temporary public realm changes. So this was piloting initiatives that hadn't actually been used within the council before. So as an example would be parklets, which is a temporary structure within the confines of a parking space, which could enable a hospitality sector business to expand their outdoor catering. There were planters which would be available to demarcate outdoor eating areas, and hand sanitisers were installed on lamp columns. They had a weekly maintenance contract where residents could actually sanitise their hands easily. All the where and how these temporary changes were utilised was very much based on evidence base from the businesses themselves. So that was from surveys that we did online and in person, where trading standards and licensing were key in terms of instrumental in terms of the hospitality businesses as well. And also very much area based. So we gave the example of Cold Harbour Lane in Hayes, where the restaurants and cafes already have very extensive privately owned forecourts, through to areas perhaps such as Ruislip, which have much narrower pavements in terms of the ability for restaurants to be able to offer outdoor seating then. And this was in the context of the changes in government guidance between 2020 and to date in terms of whether people could access indoors for restaurants and bars, or whether it had to be outdoors as well. So it was keeping in tune with the government guidance of that time as well. And then on page 11 we give a summary of the location and the street furniture that is being trialled. For the parklets, they are on experimental traffic orders, and residents can comment up until 8th of May for the Ruislip and Eastcote parklets, and up until August for Uxbridge. Again, these are all temporary arrangements, and then we'll assess from the feedback from residents in terms of whether it's something that the council may want to continue, or if it's just seen as something that was just relevant for the time in terms of COVID at that time, and it might not be so relevant to continue as well. And then on page 12 we refer to the festive lighting programme, because over and above the support from the Welcome Back funding grant, there was the successful festive light programme that the council runs, and which is very active in terms of giving residents Christmas lights within the town centres, and also events were held where it was safe to do so, supported through the Welcome Back grant as well. So again, encouraging the return to the high street and the safe return to the high street as well. I'll hand over to Nigel in terms of economic development.
Okay, thank you. Good evening all. My element of the report basically captures activity that doesn't fall within the areas of Helena's work or Stephanie's. So I've chosen to highlight the activities of our partners in Uxbridge Business Improvement District, Uxbridge BID, very much key to supporting activity in Uxbridge. Already heard Helena talking about the festive lights, and around those festive lights the BID went to town, so to speak, and staged quite a major event basically, and very popular, welcoming lots of people back in, and that's basically where the BID have been coming from, trying to get our residents and the retailers and the office sector back to using Uxbridge. Why is that important? Well, I think evidence is starting to show that whilst our smaller town centres are doing okay, very much the message of shop local, eat local, work local seems to have gained traction during the COVID crisis. Uxbridge has not been so lucky. If you look at Uxbridge, it's lost some of its bigger retailers, and that's a challenge for the future because some of the units that have been left, whereas in our smaller town centres they've been snapped up by independent traders, people wanting to open their own businesses. Some of the units that we've got in Uxbridge aren't that easy to let. Devon's is a classic example, but that was an anchor store. How do you replace something like that? So, big challenge moving forward in Uxbridge. Most of our smaller town centres seem to be doing very well. I'd highlight it's only a small funding that the GLA made available, but partners came together, Uxbridge BID again, Hillingdon Chamber of Commerce and Brunel University to secure this funding with obviously the council's support. Now, they were awarded £20,000. What they've used that money to do is do an evaluation of Uxbridge High Street, reimagining Uxbridge High Street it's called, and it's been very well received document, and it will help us as a council as we move forward to try and come up with a overarching plan in terms of supporting Uxbridge's development over the next few years. It would be remiss of me to not acknowledge this evening the support that the government has put into supporting small businesses. We as a council acted as the distributor of a range of ARG grants, assisted revenue grant, and as you say here, a staggering amount of money came into our borough and it's been distributed, and I think it is evident that that money has served the high streets in our borough very well indeed. So those are the key highlights for me. Now hand over to Stephanie.
Good evening, councillors. I'm just going to take you through the role of the regulatory teams that I looked after and how we adapted and kind of supported businesses throughout the period. So we have a range of officers across licensing, environmental health, ASBIT and trading standards who are really repurposed to visit businesses and provide advice and guidance on step 1, step 2, step 3 as we emerged from the various stages of lockdown and we were in that ever-changing scene of regulations and restrictions. So as the announcements were made about lockdown easing through the early part of 2021, our stance changed from really robustly enforcing all the COVID restrictions to educating and supporting businesses to get back on their feet and to kind of get used to a new operating in a more confident way. We carried out over 6,000 of these visits throughout a 12-month period and assisted businesses with social distancing requirements, ventilation guidance, risk assessments, hygiene infection control strategies, outbreak management, etc., and any just sort of general signposting that our officers were able to do, such as the grants and navigating through the application process. The 12th of April last year saw the first set of restrictions lifted for non-essential retail and personal care businesses. In Hillingdon, we have around 300 to 400 salons, beauticians, hairdressers, etc. And our team ensured that they were all notified of the requirements. There was an enhanced risk of infection because of the close contact required. So our officers made sure that they were all visited, provided with the risk assessment templates and PPE best practice advice. Hospitality venues were allowed to accommodate diners only outdoors, so at this time. So our officers visited hundreds of pubs and bars and restaurants to advise on how they could adapt their outdoor spaces and make use of some of the initiatives that Helena has mentioned for actually dining spaces being used on the pavement and in sort of temporary structures, etc. They were given that practical advice on temporary structures. There's obviously all things like the smoke-free regulations, and all of those still applied. So our officers were on hand to guide businesses through that. As June and July brought an end to all the business restrictions, the aim of the team was to provide as much support to businesses as possible and to restore confidence in operations after such a long period of restrictions and changing requirements. It was about enabling that return to a more business-as-usual operation. The teams also supported a number of events through the Welcome Back campaign by providing guidance on licensing requirements and also best practice for public health and public safety. Hillingdon has around 3,000 food premises who are subject to regular inspections from our food safety team. These visits were understandably put on hold throughout the various lockdowns, but we have resumed those, and we resumed those in 2021. And we began to carry out our food hygiene inspections once more. And we're currently undergoing a catch-up programme to ensure that we catch up with all the high-risk food premises. We're aiming to do that by the end of June 2022. And then as winter 2021 brought new concerns with the Omicron variant, visits were ramped up once again to help provide that advice and guidance on best practice. And at that time, there were still no restrictions in place, so it was very much about guidance and support rather than the kind of compliance and enforcement that we had been used to previously. The team supported light touch licensing systems to allow tables and chairs to be used outdoors, particularly on the pavements, public highway spaces, and we've actually issued 95 licences to businesses since February 2021, and all these licences have been issued for free following a resolution made by full council to waive all the charges associated with those licences. We've also ensured that businesses are supported in making payments for licence fees by introducing instalment plans. We appreciate that many have been hit really hard financially, so we've taken a more flexible approach to licence fee collection, and we've allowed gradual payments in instalments and that sort of thing. And support continues as businesses are still recovering and we see a return to normal operations. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd invite questions from members if there are any. We'll start with Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks to the officers. I thought it was a really good report. I have to confess, Helen, I was one of the people who queried the EU logo, so I have to confess that I was suitably corrected on that. Stephanie, you mentioned the pavement licensing, the light touch, and I think you said 95. Bearing in mind, I'm assuming that they wouldn't have had licences otherwise. I was wondering whether there had been any problems with these establishments at all.
Not especially, not over and above what we'd normally see. We have had the odd kind of issue with maybe sort of stretching the amount of space that is being used, but we do have our officers on hand and reports that will be responded to in the usual way if there are any issues with enforcement. Yeah, so there was no... It's just the usual issues, shall we say? Our usual issues, if I can define, it would be, normally somebody stretching just a little bit beyond what they're actually permitted to use, or opening a little bit later than perhaps they're permitted to. But all the pavement licences are conditioned, and they because they're renewed so frequently, we are able to restrict as we go, as they come up for renewal. But we are also able to enforce. So any issues we would just respond to in the normal way. Can I just to follow up on that, Chairman? How long will the rules be in place, so to speak, the special situation? Yeah, so pavement licences were introduced for a temporary period, and that actually expires in September this year. There is a lot of pressure from the hospitality industry for the government to the Department for Levelling Up to actually make those easements permanent. We do have the old system of street trading licences, however that is a lot more of a cumbersome and clunky system compared to this very light touch system. So there is a very strong argument for allowing that light touch system to stay, as it has really been working quite well for the last couple of years. So as soon as I have some info on whether that is going to be made permanent, I can inform you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, thank you for all of you for this. I've got a few comments, as I'm sure you'll expect. On page 9, about the music festival in Hayes, I'm slightly concerned about that because I actually attended the music festival with Councillor Farley, and it was abysmal. Considering Hayes is the place where a lot of music happens, EMI, I mean that's in my back garden, which is now the old vinyl factory. I was amazed that I appreciate it was raining at the time, but there were very few people knew what was going on, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, I was followed around by a man with a monkey on his arm and a boater and a hurdy-gurdy. I mean, it was very, very strange. But people were, no, all joking aside, people were very confused about what it was about. There was, under the gold disc, there was a girl doing karaoke, and there was a couple of, the town drunks actually enjoyed it, in fair play to them, and there were some African drummers. I mean, considering the history that Hayes has got, I was slightly, well, I suppose more than slightly disappointed. In fact, I was quite annoyed. I was embarrassed, to be perfectly honest with you, as I'm sure Councillor Farley was, because we were walking around thinking, around this corner, something good's going to happen. Wrong, you know. So that's the complaint about that. And also, what's the other thing? On page 11, we've got about all the different, the planters and parklets and stuff like that. Why is Hayes always an afterthought? You know, he's part of the borough. I mean, myself and Councillor Farley and Councillor Curling work really closely with David Bruff, who runs the Hayes Town Partnership, and he's working incredibly hard to get things done. In fact, he badgers me regularly. But I just trying to work out why nobody has done anything about Hayes. It's all, literally, we're always the afterthought. And bearing in mind, I live in the area I represent, people complain to me about it because they see things advertised in Hillingdon People and think, well, why haven't we got that? So I'd like hopefully an explanation on that one. Also, on the, I think, what were they called, COVID officers or whatever, you know, marshals, although you say they did 6,000 visits, I know a lot of them were results of us ringing up and complaining, because there were some devious shop owners, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, they had their windows closed, and it was like, not 3 times, come in here and have your hair cut, and all that sort of thing. But how many were, do you know, roughly, were the results of councillors reporting things going on, or just how many that blitz the whole street? Is there anything else?
Councillor Gardner, I think that would be enough just for now, because
right,
I like to go around the table and make sure everyone gets a fair chance of asking questions. If you do have more questions, I will come back to you afterwards, if that's okay. So let's let the officers answer those questions, then we'll move on to the next person.
Perhaps I can help in terms of the trial of temporary street furniture. So that was trialled in areas where the pavement widths were very restricted. So in Hayes, Cold Harbour Lane is the area where there's the most concentration of restaurants and cafes. They actually have very, very wide private pavements that already facilitate outdoor eating. We did engage with David Bruff in terms of that, and also the temporary street furniture was specifically to facilitate a kind of a main course eating experience rather than something that would be used by takeaway kind of cafes as well. So that was the reason why that particular temporary furniture wasn't trialled within Hayes. It was, businesses were consulted, for example, in Newsley and West Drayton, but there was no take-up from the businesses there in terms of wanting this temporary kind of street furniture as well. In terms of the events, we had never before put on 21 high street events in 6 months, and I think with Hayes there are many lessons to be learned, and I take on board all your criticism. We're not sitting here saying that every event was equally successful for many reasons, like you say, in terms of the weather, the lead up in terms of planning the event. The budget for each event was around 4,400, so being realistic in terms of what could be achieved for that budget as well. But we would hope for Hayes that could form a basis, a starting point for future events as well. And also we will be able to use that learning in terms of the forthcoming Canal Festival, and we've already engaged with David Brough in terms of what would add value to that event as well. So for example, with the Canal Festival in Hayes, the feedback from the Hayes Town Business Forum was that it tends to concentrate around Botwell Bridge, and the feedback from the businesses is that they don't see much greater footfall from that event. So what we've planned is a high street trail, which will be themed in terms of the canal. So school-age children can go through the shop windows within Cold Harbour Lane and a greater distance from Botwell Bridge, doing a special trail to find motives kind of hidden in the shop windows, and then there'll be a prize for everyone taking part in that event. But like I say, we take on board your comments about the music festival, and it's something that we can learn on and build on from that as well.
Yes.
Just pick up the point about the enforcement and the complaints about businesses in Hayes Town. We do know there was an issue in Hayes Town particularly, as you say, with businesses perhaps appearing to be closed and then not 3 times and you'll be let in kind of situations. We did actually carry out the most enforcement in Hayes, and we did issue the most FPNs in Hayes. That was pre the recovery period. This was very much going right back into 2020, in that real early period of the pandemic, where we had those very robust enforcement powers. We did actually issue quite a few for shisha bars, mobile phone shops, and a few other places as well. So we did carry out a fair amount of enforcement, and the patrols that were being carried out in response to complaints were also quite high. I think at one point we were in pretty much daily communication with David Brough about intelligence that he picked up on through the community. So officers did respond to that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with commending the people that were running the retail revival. People were very nice. I met a number of them because I attended a number of the events to see how they went, and speaking to residents and to businesses and seeing how they went or how they thought things were going. So they worked very hard. I also think, unfortunately, yes, a lot of stuff was blighted by weather. Particularly the literary events that were held in the half-term week. The one at the Master Brewer site area parade, forgive me, I don't know the Hillingdon Circus parade there. That one I thought would work quite well because of the size of the area, and it worked quite well either side. The Harlington one seemed a bit peculiar because it was set away from shops on a church forecourt, so it was sort of tucked away, and some people I noted didn't know where it was, and the signs were sort of melting in the rain and things. So what was available, they were quite tucked away. And the one on the Oxford Road was sort of quite localised. I mean, the Oxford Road obviously covers a large area, going from the Aussie Garvin along up to Lansbury Drive. So it was sort of quite localised. The Eastcote event that happened a couple of weeks ago. So we had the Eastcote and the Northwood ones, which are food orientated or themed, and the Ricelet one, which is a craft fair. Again, I'm speaking with people there. I've got a question that comes on to the parklets and things sort of out of that too. Just to give some sort of feedback, I know you'll be getting that anyway, but some feedback I've received from people and businesses. The Eastcote one, there was the food theme was fine, but what people were telling me was that they felt that it didn't represent the diversity of food and diversity of the population in Eastcote. So that's something that was sort of felt a bit peculiar. And they said they're very proud of the diversity that I was told there. But also the parklets that were located. There's one that's at the north end of the high street, another one at the south end of there. The parklet that's at the north end, there was some criticism of where that had been located next to a disability bay and a local pharmacy, and felt that it was causing an obstruction in that location. So I don't know what was. You said that the businesses had sort of given feedback of where to put them and locate them, but that was a criticism they had about that one. But I would like to know with the parklets, they require a license to be operated. How many licenses were issued for those? Because I've driven past a number of them recently over the last few months. They're not being used. The one in Ricelet has no furniture inside it; it's empty. These ones, I think, do have some tables and chairs inside, but I'm wondering, were they being used at the beginning and they're haven't been recently? Is it weather, time of the year?
Thank you. I can just address your issue on the parklets. The one in Eastcote, we did have some feedback from the local community when that first went in. The thing with the parklets is they're no bigger than a vehicle, so they're made to fit into a parking space. So there would be no more of an obstruction in a parking bay than if there were a vehicle in there. And the fact that it was sited next to a disabled bay, if it was filled with a car, it would have created just as much of an obstruction, arguably. And we haven't actually had any complaints directly from any residents who haven't been able to park in there. So we haven't had any. I think a lot of the concern is a bit of a what if, we haven't actually had any feedback from somebody that's actually been disadvantaged or hasn't been able to get a car in there. So but as Helen said, they are experimental traffic orders. They are open. They are temporary. We will carry out a full review of that as and when the end date comes. Your question with regard to licensing, the one in Ricelet. It's unfortunate that the trader had a change of heart after it was actually put in, and decided not to progress with the licence. So we're at the moment looking at an alternative location to move that one to. So yes, it's a shame that it's standing there empty for the moment. But we are because these things are subject to traffic orders, etc. It's not just a case of picking it up and moving it somewhere else. It's got to be properly planned. So there is hopefully a resolution in place for that one quite soon. With regard to the other ones, they are all licensed. The most recent one is the one in Uxbridge, has just obtained a licence a few weeks ago. And as far as I'm aware, the others are all in use. Haven't you? I think a lot of the premises are probably evening based. Yeah. It may just be a sign that it's earlier in the year, the weather isn't great. Again, these are temporary, so we will be seeing how they go. And I'm sure in a few weeks' time, as we're getting yet lighter evenings and better weather, hopefully they'll be used a little bit more.
Councillor Farley, do you have a supplementary question you'd like to ask before I move on?
Thank you, Chair. Just going back with this, so the one that's in Ricelet, is not actually in a parking bay. It's on a single yellow line next to the business. So it's not quite in a parking bay. There's some sort of loading thing next to it on that one. The point that was being made to me about the one in Eastcote was that it reduces the number of bays that are close to the pharmacy for people with mobility issues and so forth. That was more the point. It wasn't so maybe obstruction was the wrong word to use, but it was an impediment, should we call it that, to getting closer to the. So obviously you've got disabled bay there, but others that don't have disabled badges, that may still need to get to the pharmacy. It was sort of considered to be a inappropriate, shall we say, location, and that was more the point that was being raised with me on that. I'd like to know, with regards to the scope of the events and what the scope was that was given to retail revival and so forth, because taking Northwood as an example, the event was fine. They were located in certain areas within each of the high streets. The one in Northwood was located outside Costa's and another bit over across the road outside one of the old post office road there, where the library. The theme was food, which was fine. I think for Northwood was fine, but the scope for all of these are aimed sort of more at children. But I'm wondering if there was capacity there to look at the nighttime economy with regards to Northwood. They've got lots of restaurants there. Was that not something that was considered? Thank you.
I can just to reiterate that a lot of these areas were areas where there'd never been these kind of events before. So part of this pilot was really to test out different approaches. And I should have meant there will actually be a full evaluation that we'll receive in April, specifically on retail revival and the events, which we can pass on to the committee as well. You mentioned diversity in East Coast, so I do know that the food trail was aimed at people being able to buy ingredients from all of the shops within the town centre. So the format of the food trail was to try and encourage people to visit all the shops, and so the content of the diversity was reflected in the shops that were actually there within the high street. If you see what I mean from that. As you say, the weather in the for the children's literature half-term events, unfortunately, Harlington was actually the day after the big storm, and so the events that were due to take place actually outside the shops, it was moved to the forecourt of the church at very short notice, so that there would be some area where, if need be, people could actually be inside, depending on how the weather was during that day as well. We do know that within Harlington, 10 businesses participated, which for the size of that parade of shops was very good, and that's something that we'd like to build on as well in terms of that particular area. Like you say, along the Uxbridge Road, that is a very long stretch of road, and again I think that the rain was unfortunate there as well. We do know for the first time there's been a Christmas light installation actually at Belmore Parade, which did encourage, so it was an artificial Christmas tree, like a pyramid shaped tree that was installed there, and that actually did create a lot of selfies and was actually much appreciated by residents and the businesses there. But in terms of the literature and the children, it was really on the premise that a family themed event, but again there's a lot of potential to build on these as well.
Thank you. Councillor Ahmed Walana.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Stephanie and Helena, for your wonderful presentation. We heard lots of good news from you, to be honest with you, during these very unprecedented and difficult times of COVID.
Only one complaint was about COVID marshals. Their maybe behavior, according to the business, was not appropriate and professional, so they were immediately taken off the job, and that was a very good response. Very well managed, and council did a great job during this time. In usually High Street and of course the Fairfield Road, we have wonderful cafes. They offer lunch and breakfast. As you said, the design and size of the pavement is not that kind that people can have outdoor displays for giving the food and refreshments. We were not, I was not contacted by any of the businesses to get that kind of support, so because it was not needed. Only one point, in terms of music festival, I love music, and I would like to see, I don't know whether it's relevant to this committee, Chairman, you know, the stage play dramas. I mean, if any idea to promote stage dramas to attract maybe youth and you know, maybe comedy or literature to attract audience, maybe young.
Are you mentioning about youth demonstrating in particular, or just generally across?
Generally,
in generally, I think I mean it would have to be put to colleagues in the arts service, perhaps, who work very closely with youth theatre groups and that sort of thing. So perhaps that's something that Neil can take back and send off to the arts service, perhaps, to ask what their programmes are.
Do you have a follow-up? Can you use your microphone, please? Thank you.
So in terms of digital marketing training for Hillingdon businesses, how popular this was, this initiative? I mean, did you have any challenges, or it was quite well received, the services to get training for digital marketing?
We actually are waiting the figures in terms of attendance, because I think the last event was the 14th of March, so it was just 2 days ago. So that's still relatively new. I think from initial feedback, I think the biggest challenge was actually targeting the kind of businesses who could benefit from the training. So we did use the council, the social media channels that they use there, and information was also given to Hillingdon Chamber, Rysick Chamber, Hayes, and the local chambers of commerce. But what we're waiting for is the feedback from participants about how they heard about the event, so we can see in terms of marketing in the future what worked and where we could improve on that as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Brightman.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to you all for a great report. Mine's just a quick what-if question. I'm very conscious that Ryfield and Kingshill Avenue nearly didn't go ahead because of the withdrawal of funding from, I think it was either TfL or Mayor of London, but next stage up. Is there any, but fortunately there was some fund, there was sufficient funds found for it to happen. Do you know if there's any plans for sufficient funding, because it could be rolled out in other places that would, you know, I can think of a few quite local to where we are in Charville that would benefit from the same treatment, because the residents have absolutely gone for it. You know, there's a few niggles, but we're looking forward to having the screening on Adelphi. That will really improve the area, and then it really has improved the area enormously. So is the sort of lack of funding for this that was found in an emergency going to impact being able to roll out the scheme for the local shopping parades, please?
So just to clarify, so that was the funding for the public realm improvements and the shopfront grants. No. Again, I think this might be a follow-up, Neil, in terms of Alan Tilley's team, the transport and projects. As far as I know, in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on Tfl Finances, the budgets for local authorities have been greatly reduced. And I think, as far as I know, that TfL are in discussions with central government on a kind of 6-month rolling basis, whereas before they might well have had their finances on an annual basis as well. But having said that, we always look at other forms of funding that we might be able to use. So, for example, in areas around Ickenham and South Ruislip impacting by HS2, there might be funding from there that could be utilised. There might be Section 106 agreement funding from developers as well. So we always try and look at how to maximise the funding, but I think the actual position in terms of TfL would have to be checked with other colleagues.
Thank you, Helena. No, my primary concern is that we don't stop as a council with that initiative, because it has, made everyone a little bit lighter in their step.
Thank you. Councillor Deville.
Yeah, on page 7, it's got the government announced on the 20th of March a reopening for the Health and Safety Fund. Do you know how many people took that up?
Sorry, the reopening High Street Safety Fund. That was the fund that was awarded to the local authority rather than to individual businesses. So originally in 2021 there was the Reopening High Street Safety Fund, and then that was superseded by the Welcome Back Fund, but that was a grant to local authorities rather than to businesses themselves.
Do you wish to follow up, Councillor Deville? Yeah.
I'd just like to say, usually the Mayor turned on the lights at Christmas, and that was a really good event. That was really good. Lots of people turned up. So.
Yeah, I think it was the first time that we'd run a Christmas event in using that. That's something we would be hoping that we can be replicated as well. I think given the feedback, I think with the events it was very much in terms of timing, in terms of what people were allowed to do, and the guidance at the time, and weather dependent as well. And going forward, we would like to have a longer lead in time in terms of planning the event. So there's lots of lessons to be learnt, but there was that this forms a good platform to be able to then improve on that as well.
Thank you. Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of quick questions initially. So on page 9, the table, the footfall, is that based on the returns or the giving out of the trail forms?
That was based on giving out of the trail forms and also the giving out of the bags as well. And so it's not it's an estimate. It's not a scientific data that we could use, but also feedback from the businesses as well. So it's just a guide in terms of how well attended each event was, rather than a very specific and accurate number. But it was mainly in terms of the like I say, the High Street Trail and the giving out of bags that were available if they were ready for those events as well.
Yeah, because with that, I mean, speaking with the guys on the events, they said that they were monitoring both what was being given out and what was coming back on those. With that though, how are we measuring whether or not the footfall translates to sales in businesses and actually is increasing the actual businesses' sales figures? Because speaking with some of the businesses, they were telling me that some of them the Saturdays were like normal. They were not because people would just look. The kids were putting their foot in, and moving on to the next one. It wasn't actually bringing people into the shop. So is there some sort of measure that we're using, or is that purely feedback?
That will be part of the evaluation form, and the feedback from the businesses that we get from that as well, which will be part of the evaluation report as well. Another indicator that we'll be using is that the Retail Revival did an audit of empty shops, vacant shops in the summer in all the areas, and then they'll go back and do an audit now, which might give some indication about business confidence as well.
Yeah, because one of the things that also was mentioned was that in certain areas, things like banks that would be a draw into the town centre, obviously a lot of them are actually, Santander in Hayes has gone. I think it was Lloyd's in Northwood that has gone, and various HSBC as well. So I know that was also raised. Another quick question on page 14 talks about the rateable discounts. We're looking at some bits and pieces. I was wondering whether or not there's something. A 2% supplement that's applied to developments around Crossrail. Was that suspended, or was that continued? Because apparently that's from what I was reading, it's meant to be charged to businesses. I'm wondering if that had been suspended during this period, where the discounts were in operation.
That wasn't my section.
That question may be better directed to the head of rates. That's not the information that we would have for the purpose of this report. Maureen Pemberton, in head of rates, would be able to help you with that.
Okay. And if I may, Chair, just one last question.
Very briefly, Councillor Farley, because you've asked two, and I've got your colleague wanting to ask one as well. I was talking about the promotion of the events as well. I know that was on social media. There was I think there was reference to it in the January Hillingdon People, but people I spoke to were not aware of it. Some of the businesses weren't aware that it was even happening. They were coming out asking the Retail Revival people, what is this? So I was wondering if you could sort of elaborate more on what was done with promotion, because in the appendix we've just got the Hillingdon People front cover. Thank you.
Right, so in terms of the promotions in the events, all the businesses would have been visited to see whether they wanted to participate. Sometimes whether it's the information might not have been passed on to the manager or the owner, I'm not sure, but they would have all been visited to see if they wanted to join in terms of the trail. Again, I'll just go back a bit in terms of lessons learned, and it might well be that what we hadn't used but we had used before many years ago was kind of like banners on roundabouts and things like that, and it might be that actually that complementing social media would be a way of reaching more people as well. So I think that, again, that's part of the evaluation and lessons that we learned, that perhaps some of the more traditional methods should still be used, but with newer ways of doing that as well. Where there were residents' associations, all the information was given to them as well to be able to publicise in their newsletters. So it might well be in areas where they weren't very strong residents' associations or that kind of setup, that might have been affected as well. But certainly all the information was given to the relevant ward councillors for them to be able to distribute through their own networks as well.
Thank you very much. We have been discussing this item for nearly an hour now, so I will take the last one from Councillor Gardner. If you do have more questions, please feed them through to Neil, and we'll get the answers outside of the meeting to ensure that your questions are answered. So we'll finish with Councillor Gardner.
Just a quick suggestion. Next time, can you please consult the councillors for the individual areas, because they're more likely to know what is needed and where things should be. Okay.
That's it? Okay. Right, thank you to the officers for your attendance this evening and answering the questions from members, and for conducting a very good report. It's very much appreciated. Thank you. And you may leave if you wish to do so. We move on to item 6, which is the Cabinet Forward Plan, pages 45 to 52. Are there any questions, or do you happy to note it? Okay. Item 7 is the Work Programme, pages 53 to 56. As you can see, it's very light because we are heading into that, I think it's an election, they said we was heading into. I think so, yeah. Someone said. I read about it. Yeah, I've read about it as well. So that's why the work programme is fairly light, and we'll have a new committee formed after May, whoever they may be. But is everyone happy with that? Any questions? I thought you would be, Councillor Gardner. With that said, that concludes our business for this evening then. Thank you for your attendance, and thank you for serving on this committee, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you after May, but who knows? Who knows? Good night, everyone.